Okay, dear colleagues, welcome to our last session for today, which will be entirely offline, but with a live Zoom transmission. So we hope that our colleagues can also join us this way. And before we will jump to the presentation of a very interesting book project by Olena Palko and Konstantin Ardeleanu, I wanted to announce a couple of journals and also books that have been published on the topic of Ukraine in general during this year or will be published very soon. As we can see in today's program, we have quite a lot of topics and presentations that are dealing with Ukraine. As many of you know, in the last couple of years, this was our main focus. So we mainly concentrated on transcultural contact zones in Ukraine. But since recently, we have switched to a broader geographical and regional focus. Hence, we are very happy to have a more diverse presence of various Black Sea regions in our conference this year. So first and foremost, here you can see a small but important book by Ulrich Schmidt, which was published by Routledge this year. It's called Ukraine Contested Nationhood in a European Context. It's basically an overview of a Ukrainian historical dialogue with Europe. So it's a really great book to for someone who starts their journey in Ukrainian studies. A second book is a kind of shameless self-promotion because this is called The Burden of the Past, History, Memory, and Identity in Contemporary Ukraine. Basically, here authors deal with how various pasts of Ukraine are today remembered and also instrumentalized. And this book also includes my chapter on the memory of the Holocaust in Ukraine, and it has been published this year by Indiana University Press. And then I would like to share a screen to show the, okay. I have a problem because I can, okay. So, and also this year we had 3 issues of Xenos. As you know, it is an open access journal that you can find on our webpage of the Center for Governance and Culture. And the first issue dealt with case studies on mass atrocities and survival in the modern history of Ukraine. The next one, the next one actually connects to the topic which Austin presented. So this was the issue on Ukrainian Crimean Tatar socio-cultural encounters, and it was edited by Alexander Kratochvil. And last published issue is edited by Cécile Drouillet, who is also present with us today, and Eliane Fitze. And the topic of this issue is instrumentalization of the past and political mobilization. And actually, it's a very interesting comparative picture of the instrumentalization of the past in various countries of post-Soviet realms. So there are articles on Georgia and Abkhazia, and also on Serbia, on North Caucasus. So it's a very interesting comparative framework. The book, which features the chapter by Oksana Myshlovska, deals with decentralization, regional diversity, and conflict, focusing on the case of Ukraine. And it also has been published this year by Palgrave Macmillan. And last but not least, we are expecting very soon the book by Tornike Metreveli, who is also here today, dealing with Orthodox Christianity and the politics of transition, focusing on Ukraine, Serbia, and Georgia. So this book will be published also by Routledge in December, if I'm not mistaken, but it is already available for pre-order. So as you can see, it was quite a fruitful year in terms of the publications focusing on Ukraine and on comparative context. And we are looking forward also to the volume which Olena will present today. Please, Olena, the floor is yours. The presentation. Okay, so we have to share the screen and we have to share PDF. And sorry, it just has this. Is it? Yeah, just a second. I need to move. Sorry for this technical issues, but we have a lot of screens to share. Please.
Thank you.
Okay, yeah, perfect.
So in a way, I think this volume must be presented and here, because the idea of this volume and the project itself came to us in Užhgorod 2 years ago. And there in Užhgorod, when a lot of you were there already, a lot of papers dealt with the formation of Ukraine's border. But they were like dealing with the border, but not necessarily thinking about the formation of the border. And back then in Užhgorod, I thought that it would be good to have a workshop or have an academic event when people would come and talk about the formation of the border, how the border was drafted, how the border was negotiated, how it was basically who agreed on the border, and when Ukraine became what it is at the moment. And then in 2018, Konstantin and I, we also discussed this project, the idea with Ulrich, and he agreed to support us financially. And then we started thinking about the concept of this project. And at first, we thought about this only as a workshop. Then it became a publication project. And I just want to talk, so this project consists of 3 different parts. It's a workshop, it's a visualization of Ukraine's borders, and thirdly, it's a publication project. So I'll talk like very briefly about each part.
You can scroll it.
Okay. So first we we issued a call for papers and for a workshop, international workshop that took place at the New York College in Bucharest, and we received 23 papers, and out of which 12 papers and presenters were invited to the workshop, and 8 papers later on were included in the volume itself. This workshop gave us an excellent opportunity to evaluate papers and to see not beyond the mere proposal, because beyond the 200 words proposal. But at the same time, it gave the opportunity to the authors to discuss their papers, to present their papers, to meet other contributors, and to understand where their topics, how it all fit together within one volume. Most importantly for us as editors, it gave an opportunity to see any possible potential overlaps, and then later on to discuss with the contributors how to avoid those overlaps and the repetitions in the volume. And at the same time, as I said, it gave us an opportunity to evaluate the quality of the potential contributions, and 2 papers or 3 papers, I think we did not go beyond that stage. So we rejected them at the very early stage and did not go with those authors beyond the workshop. Then the second aspect, now I need to go to the clip. So the second aspect of this project is the visualization of Ukraine's borders.
You want to maybe you will finish a PDF and then we will turn it on, because it's a different mode.
All right, I'll show it then.
We will show it afterwards. Okay?
So the second aspect of this project is the visualization of Ukraine's borders. We commissioned 15 maps, historical maps dealing with the changes of Ukraine's border, of the Ukraine modern border. This is one of the captures from the script that we made, and I'll later, after this presentation, I'll show you this kind of visualization, a very short video that demonstrates how the border of modern Ukraine was changed. We have 15 maps dealing with, I think the earliest starts in 1914 and the latest in 2015, I believe. And these maps are actually, they are a great help for all those kind of future readers, because they will also include those maps in the appendices of the volume, and it will be as a reference materials for the readers later. And the third part is the publication itself. So I must say that from the very beginning, it was one of the conditions for funding that this project should result in a publication. So when we issued the call for papers, we already framed it as a publication project. So we asked our contributors to have this final publication in mind, that they are not only submitting a proposal for a presentation, 15 minutes presentation, but it must be a chapter, so 8,000 words chapter. And this, I think, helped us to speed up the process, because before the workshop in December, the authors already submitted their full drafts by October. So it kind of helped us to work faster later on. So this is just a map to show Ukraine and its neighboring states. So in the publication, we discussed each aspect of the border. So on the objectives of the collected volumes. Okay, sorry, I just wanted also to say that I was lucky enough to get some interest from the commissioning editor of the McGill Queen's University Press, who saw our call for papers online and actually contacted me asking if we have found the publisher already. So from the very beginning, we had this very fruitful cooperation with the editors in McGill, and they helped us along the way. So they actually contacted me and encouraged me to prepare a book proposal, gave their pointers how to do it, and helped me like kind of along the way. So this was also kind of helped us to make this publication and the volume faster. The final version, so where are we now? The final version has, we are now working on the final version. The manuscript has been proofread. We have received the feedback and returned the feedback to the contributors. So now we have time until the end of the year to resubmit, and hopefully it will be printed early next year. So now a little bit about the objectives and difficulties that we encounter while working on this project. From the beginning, when we thought about the other publication on Ukraine and its neighbors, we found that it became clear to us that the border is always there. It is assumed as a divider between the lands and the people. But researchers, the scholars, they don't really question, problematize the formation of the border itself. The border is there, is taken for granted, but there is no kind of discussion of the formation, of the history of the formation of the hard border of Ukraine. So our main objective was to look at the hard border of Ukraine and look at this borderline, the line that is there on the map, and how it has been negotiated, delineated, and contested during in the 20th century. Secondly, we wish to gather together academics who would represent different national historiographical traditions. We wanted to show that the history of Ukraine and the history of Ukraine's border cannot be studied within one national history or one set of sources, and we also cannot, we open it up for different historical narratives that also meant different scholarly tradition, periodization, and even ideologies. We also wanted to invite scholars who worked with different methodological approaches. As editors, we made it as open as possible. We did not prescribe any perspective on how to treat Ukraine's border. But nonetheless, as you will see later, in the present volume, political history remains the dominant approach, with most contributions focusing mostly on international relations and high politics. And thanks to Austin, who joined our project, we now have not only transnational but also interdisciplinary coverage of the formation of Ukrainian border, because he brought in some geographical perspective to this question. And and based on the objectives, later on we encountered a few very serious difficulties. As I said, we wanted to focus on Ukraine's border, hard border of Ukraine with its seven neighboring states. We wanted to collect the puzzle, so to say, but it made it hard to kind of maintain this comprehension, because some of the countries, in particular, for instance, Belarus, it was very hard for us to find an author who works on the border between Belarus and Ukraine. And at the same time, we couldn't allow gaps in the narrative, right? Because it's only 7 states plus Crimea. So if one falls out, it makes a kind of a question why we didn't discuss this country. So this was like one of the difficulties, how to maintain this comprehension and cover each section of the border. Second, as I mentioned, we didn't want to have any overlaps and repetitions. It meant that each contributor has its own basically task and discussed either a neighboring state or an international treaty. I'll show you later the table of content, how we organized it. But it also meant that if somebody drops out, and it always happens, or if some chapter was not kind of up to the standard, what to do with it, how do we replace it last minute. And this is exactly what happened. As I said, as a result, after the conference, 3 papers were rejected, 3 authors were rejected. We did not include or invited them to the final presentation, and we needed to look for replacements. We found the replacements. Then at the revision stage, one of the readers heavily criticized 2 contributions to the volume and said that we should replace them. So then we had, like, now we were facing this problem of how to how to stay coherent, but at the same time up to the standard and cover all the aspects of the border. So this was really a huge difficulty for us. Another challenge was to maintain this methodological and ideological coherence. A lot of, when we received those, as I said, we received 23 proposals for contributions, but a lot of those proposals dealt either with borderlands or with cultural, economic, social history or history of everyday life. We didn't want, of course, to discriminate, but we wanted to maintain this ideological, not methodological sort of coherence, that it is about the hard border. We didn't want to discriminate in terms of that it could be international history or history, kind of maybe other actors, state, non-state actors, and their role in the formation of the border, but we wanted to maintain this focus on the hard border itself. Then the next challenge was, of course, how to maintain the quality of contribution at the same level. And here we faced a problem of this kind of our intention to open up for different national historiographies resulted in the fact that not all the chapters were up to the appropriate academic level. And this was really a big problem of what to do. Shall we, where do we compromise? On the variety of national historiographies or on the quality of the contributions? And of course, on a practical level, the last but not the least, it was of course the financial difficulty, because a lot of contributors were not fluent in English or preferred to write their contributions in other language than English. Then it brought, of course, the question of translation and proofreading, and obviously we would like to thank Ulrich and the Center for Governance and Culture in Europe for helping us with the project. So as for outcomes, so we have 3 sections. So we have 11, in the end we have an extended introduction and 11 contributions that share the volume's objective on focusing on the process of constructing, delineating and negotiating Ukraine's border, in particular during the crucial period of 1917-1945. Altogether, kind of the main overarching objective was to show that the borders of any country are not primordial and could be subjected to revision if the historical situation would allow. And in a way, the need for this volume was actualized by the recent events in Ukraine. And of course, although the kind of current crisis is not present in the volume, we are not discussing the current situation in Ukraine, but a lot of contributions are informed by those events, and you can maybe sometimes read along the lines. So the final version, so these are the titles of individual contributions as they were submitted to us. One of the suggestions of the readers was to maybe unify the titles. So the titles in the final version might be a little bit different, but I want to, I put them here firstly to show how diverse the papers are, but at the same time, how kind of that our team of contributors is really international. So you can see that, and some of the contributors are really great experts and renowned scholars in their field. So in the first section comprises 4 essays investigating the impact of peace treaties on the role of great powers in defining Ukraine's territory. So we start with the Paris Peace Conference, then it's the Riga Peace Treaty, the Brest-Litovsk, and the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, or the changes during the Second World War. So the second section is dedicated to examining the process of border delineation between the Soviet republics, or those republics that became part of the Soviet Union. And here, this section has particular relevance to present-day Ukraine, because we also decided to include the chapter of Crimea, although this is not a state border, but we thought that discussing the transfer of Crimea to Ukraine, to Soviet Ukraine, was an important part of this puzzle. So you can see here that we have contributed. So Stefan Rindlisbacher, he contributed this chapter on the Russian-Ukrainian border. Dorota Mikhailov, this is actually one of the hardest chapters to find. She's a specialist. She's the Polish specialist on Belarus, and wrote a book on the formation of the Belarusian People's Republic, dealing also with the Ukrainian People's Republic. And then we have Alexander Voronovici, who is a Moldovan himself and contributed this chapter on Ukrainian-Moldovan border, and Austin Sharon, who recently joined our team and will contribute with the chapter on Crimea. And the last section, section 3, investigates the interstate contestations behind the formation of the Western Ukrainian border. And it discusses the formation of the border with Poland, Romania, and also the territorial definitions of the Transcarpathian region. So we have a scholar, the only scholar, a Ukrainian scholar from Ukraine, who's discussing, is discussing the formation of the Polish-Ukrainian border in Volhynia. Then Yaroslav Kovalchuk from the University of Alberta is discussing the territorial changes in Transcarpathia during the Second World War. And Konstantin Abdelaun, who is also a co-editor of this volume, he contributed with the chapter dealing on the Moldovan, Romanian, Ukrainian border at the Lower Danube. So these are our 11 contributions, and there are a number of overarching themes that kind of became obvious to us while reading those very different chapters. And one of the main aspects that became clear is that Ukraine, unlike many other states, never had political power of its own to kind of gather together lands. It has always been as an accident, as if an accident to join Western Ukraine, or Crimea came also sort of by accident. It has never come from the Ukrainian center itself, the initiative to gather land. Although those, like a lot of papers do discuss the initiatives of the Ukrainian government or the inter-Soviet Ukrainian government to negotiate the border, but the last word always came, we can say, from Moscow or from great powers to collect, we can say, like, to collect the lands of Ukraine. And this was very interesting, how to balance the interests of the kind of different levels of actors, local, regional, and then kind of international, and how they all together resulted in the formation of Ukraine's border. That said, we don't want to negate the influence of the Ukrainian agents on the formation of the border, especially those papers of Stefan Rindlisbacher. He really shows how there was a constant fight for every little village between the Ukrainian Soviet and the Russian Soviet government. So it's really an interesting and complicated story, and it's not just kind of the drawing of borders between the kind of great powers, but Ukraine is present there, but maybe not as a state, but at the kind of more sort of local level, as a kind of the agency, but not a state agency, if it makes sense. So this is our book, and we are looking forward to submitting the final version and seeing it in print. And if you have any questions, we are still kind of on this stage where we can introduce changes. So we would welcome, I mean, not to the contributors, but to the introduction. Hopefully our kind of the list of contributors is set already. So yeah, if you have any questions or comments.
Just a second, I wanted to show.
Yes, yes.
Video.
And this is a very short video, just visual. Can you put it from the very beginning?
Yes, just a second. Is it visible on Zoom? Okay, great.
Yeah, there's no video, it's just a clip. Yeah, so we end with 2018. I should have checked them again before presenting. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much, Olena, for this wonderful job. We welcome the questions from our audience or from Zoom part of our conference. Okay, Oksana?
Thank you very much and congratulations on knowing how much time it took us to put out one book. So really congratulations that your project is advancing. My question is about the theoretical framework.
Sorry.
It's not because people cannot hear you, sorry.
So my question is about the theoretical framework. Are you discussing also the principles, international principles for defining borders, state borders, and they were changing these principles, like the Paris Conference, principles which were adopted by the Soviet Union as most importantly the ethnic principle, and then kind of how are you conceptualizing? And the second question is about different concepts of statehood, like this Soviet statehood, and also during the short period, the different concept of non-Soviet state, and how are you also conceptualizing different types of statehood?
Mm-hmm. So, of course, each contributor has its own theoretical framework, and we did not try to influence their view on the border, on those theoretical questions. But in the introduction, of course, we are trying to look at yes, how the borders, how do we understand the territory of Ukraine? Is it a political nation? Is it an ethnographic nation? Because we are also trying to look kind of historically how the territory of Ukraine was mapped and what was the criteria behind mapping Ukraine. And obviously we start with ethnographic linguistic criteria, and only in the early 20th century we have political criteria, kind of, because we have Olena, who was also kind of very short-lived. And really this is if you think about statehood, it's really the Soviet idea kind of a statehood that makes Ukraine a political entity, and Soviet Ukraine on the map, and its borders finally become kind of clearly demarcated. Because there is obviously a question of laying claims on the territory, controlling the territory, and kind of having territory as a political entity. So in the introduction, we are trying to discuss kind of this change from ethnographic criteria to political criteria, and that Ukraine that we have now is actually a political entity rather than ethnographic entity. And when did this idea of like kind of an ethnopolitical map came into being? But so this is one of the ideas of the introduction. But we don't really look at the international understanding of the border, but perhaps we should. This is a good maybe point, and we could maybe also add a section to the introduction, how like kind of the concept of the border and the kind of how it was understood by Paris Peace Conference and other conferences. But kind of there is always this idea of the present, how like kind of the nation state and stateless kind of people without state, and then a nation state, and but yeah, I don't know if this is the answer, but I need to.
Okay, I guess there is a question.
So yeah, it's I have a continuation for Oksana for the question about approach, because so from the title and from the content that you have shown, it's still I have impression that main focus is on some great powers that are defining some lines, and part of the contributors are trying to explain the logic, but somehow, at least from a list of topics probably to understand it, we have to read the text, but somehow I have an impression that the border and border populations became basically an object in this approach, because at least as it's seen from table of content, and I was just thinking about so how far your authors and US editors are going into explanation what is behind this political drawing, or sometimes even random maps. Because, for example, if we are looking at map of Soviet Ukraine or early Soviet or late Soviet, it corresponds, for example, to Stepan Rudnitsky map of Ukraine, and there are a lot of so there are more than centuries of tradition of drawing Ukraine in almost the same borders. It was changed this time, but how it would be question. So how do you look at the roots of this political drawing of these lines, and also how do you try to somehow overcome this objectivation of borderland population and nations that divide it?
So I would say that perhaps, again, to refer back to Stefan Riedlichbacher, I think he's the only author who actually looks at the agency of the local population and how they petition both governments where they want to be. Other authors don't really consider the border populations, but we cannot just say that borders were drafted by great powers, because and maybe I can bring the example of Belarus, which was actually fascinating, because you never kind of think about. I mean, there is not much kind of scholarship on Belarus or Belarus and Ukraine, and it was actually fascinating to know how much effort those ethnographers and there were special commissions like of the UNR and the BNR, how many times they met to discuss in Police where the border kind of is drawn. Where is the border? Where is Belarus? Where is Ukraine? And obviously the population has the same language, and so where is the border? And actually this was and the author claims that the Belarusian-Ukrainian border is the oldest in Europe because it originated in 1919. Other borders were redrawn or maybe not in Europe, but at least like in Central Eastern Europe. And this is so. It's not only the governments that decide on the border, but there is also a lot of sort of cooperation on the middle level. Maybe not on the lower level, but at the middle level, when there are a lot of experts taking part in defining the border and maybe splitting, dividing the local population. And this is something that the agency will do discuss in the introduction, who defined the borders, right? But at the same time, we do look at this borderline, the line that we have now and how it came into being. So this was a question for us, and maybe because it's kind of a limitation, but at the same time a liberation, because we kind of look at, we try to see maybe to look how the government decided, but at the same time it opens up to see how multi-layered this kind of decision making was, and other factors that actually influence this line on the map.